Hi, y'all are. I'm glad for you to see me today, I guarantee. This is Paul Hood, the Cajun Counselor, with another episode of my podcast, The Cajun Counselor. Laissez, temps, rouler. Hi, y'all are. It's Paul Hood, the Cajun Counselor, here with another episode of my podcast, The Cajun Counselor. I wanted to start with, we're in the middle of what we would call in Louisiana carnival. Carnival season, which culminates on Mardi Gras, Fat Tuesday, which this year is February the 17th. Because Easter is tied to the lunar calendar, Easter moves. So Mardi Gras moves with it. And it can be as early as February 3rd or as late as March 9th. So, we have a number of things to discuss today on the Cajun Counselor. And I wanted to start, this might be, you say, well, Paul, you started with Mardi Gras and we thought you were going to hear about your king cake. Well, I had to put on plot on a king cake diet because I had a king cake which we can now buy locally at the Kroger, and I got 2 of them. But the problem is they come with the calories. I'm trying to watch since I've lost some ground on the weight situation, and I've picked up a couple of pounds that I need to shed. So after buying a king cake a week for the first 2 weeks, I decided that we have to go on a king cake diet. But it is nice to get a Joe Gambino cream cheese filled king cake in the mitten. Very nice, because those shipping charges will eat your lunch. Having done that before commercially, except once my dear friend Peter Zappardo made it easy and took care of it, and I'm always appreciative. What I wanted to start with is really sort of some of my beliefs and philosophies about estate planning in general. And I always begin with remembering whose estate plan it is. It's the client's estate plan. And too many advisors, estate planners of all shapes and sizes, varieties, often like to be seen as the client's most trusted advisor. And a lot of times they will simply try to lead the client. You can only lead a witness. You can't lead your own witness in court. You can't always ask them to make it easy to, you throw the answer out for them. Basically, lead them on the path. The judge is not going to let you do that. So it's important to give the clients enough space and enough empowerment that they, in fact, will be in charge of their estate plans. Because I maintain that if and when a client is empowered and is engaged in their own plan, because it's their plan, it's not my plan. Well, it's been 20 years since I had to draft a will for a law client, but it was never mine. Yeah, they may have been my words, but they were conveying their thoughts and desires and hopes and dreams. So that's important. So I'm a firm believer that the client and the client alone has to be in charge of their own planning. Because I maintain they get a better plan for not only themselves, but for their families. So that estate plan, and this is sort of concomitant with the first principle of the client being in control, that plan has to mirror the client's goals, the client's plans, not the advisor's plans. And there's a tension there, because many people want to try to pigeonhole a client. Okay, you are a taxable estate client. You are this or that. Or you have minor kids. Or you have a special needs child. Or something along those lines. And we try to pigeonhole them into the plans we think that those people need. And one of my beliefs and philosophies a bit later, and we're not going to go through all of them, I'm just going to touch on a few of them. But I'm going to touch on this one, which I don't believe in absolutisms. Every time you try to fashion a rule, now, I mean, obviously, outside of the Ten Commandments, okay, thou shalt not kill. Well, Paul, there's even exceptions to that. What about self-defense? What about in a military engagement? So yes, not even the Ten Commandments. And I just basically proved my point that you can't traffic in absolutisms. The last one I'm going to touch on, and I have I think on one, and I'm a one page, and I've probably said this before, I'm a one-page nut. I like to be able to summarize things on a page. Because I believe that if I'm able to do that, then I truly understand what it is. Okay? That's of critical importance. The last one I'll leave you with is, in an estate plan, the client wants to retain, and they should retain, control over it. But once the client is gone, okay, and the plan has been essentially made, it was ambulatory until they assumed room temperature, and now it becomes an administrable estate. Louisiana, we call those successions. But once it's that, an estate plan should have checks and balances on power and authority. Y'all know that I'm a quote nut, and one of the quotes that I often insert here was old Lord Acton's quote: "Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." I think that's exactly it. That is a very, very important thing. Is you build in, you may have a trustee, but maybe there's a way you build in a right to remove a trustee, and make a change. So I think that's a very, very important thing. All right, since I dragged y'all into the world of my brain and my philosophies, and I'm a Stoic philosophy in the Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius genre. Love Seneca too. But I'm excited because in March, I'm teaching a non-credit course on one of my absolute favorite government historical figure in Marcus Aurelius, who was Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, because his father, who was his adopted father, Antoninus Pius, was one of the 5 good, in fact, Marcus was the last of what they call the 5 good Antonine emperors of Rome, the Roman Empire. And he spent much of his reign, which was from 161 to 180 Anno Domini, in Gaul, campaigning against the Gauls and all the various tribes up there. And he wrote a book, and it was really his internal journal, a diary of sorts. And it's all principles. And he talks to himself, and it's a wonderful book. It was when he died, because he died on campaign, and his adjutant, they found this book, and it was never supposed to be made public. And for about 1,000 years, it wasn't. It was discovered in a library somewhere in Italy after the year 1000 Anno Domini. But I get to teach, because it's a book that I look at, and it's a great book. And It was never intended to be a book. It's really kind of, they have 12 they call them notebooks. But I get to teach his book to himself. And if there was ever a philosopher king that Plato talked about in the Republic, if there was ever a true, honest, good philosopher king, the example is Marcus Aurelius. So, now you get a couple of Cajun jokes, because I've had a couple of requests, not for specific jokes, but say, hey, Cajun Counselor, what about a little, some Cajun jokes, maybe even a Justin Wilson joke? Well, I'll tell you one regular Cajun joke. It's a Boudreaux Thibodeau joke. Actually, it's a Boudreaux joke. And then I'll tell you a Justin Wilson joke. One day, Boudreaux was sprawled out on 3 seats in the Sanger Theater in New Orleans on Canal Street. Real swanky, old, grand. I used to love to go to the Sanger. A beautiful, beautiful building. Just I loved it. Still do. I haven't been in it in years. So an usher comes down the aisle and she sees him. And he's over 3 seats, 2 or 3 seats. And she says, "Sir, you can only have 1 seat. You need to get into 1 seat or I'll have to go get the manager." He just moaned. So she goes up, and pretty soon now, and we got a Karen, the officious manager. And she says, "Sir, policy here is that we only occupy 1 seat. You either get in 1 seat now or I'm going to go get a New Orleans policeman." So she marches out. And sure enough, the 8th precinct is right there on Royal Street in New Orleans, not far away. And the policeman walks up to him, and he's still in the same spot. And he said, "All right, buddy, what's your name?" And this time he goes, "Boudreaux." I goes, "Boudreaux, you Cajun?" He goes, "Me too." He said, "Where you from?" He said, "The balcony." So there you go. That's number 1. Now we'll go with a Justin Wilson joke. Back in the 30s to the 1950s, there was a low minor league in South Louisiana called the Evangeline League. It was hot pepper baseball. He goes, in 1 year, rain, in fact, my hometown, I'll interject here. My hometown of Alexandria, Louisiana, had a team named the Alexandria Aces that were in that Texas League. I mean, not the Texas, well, they were eventually in the Texas League, but in that Evangeline League. And my father told me that he saw Mickey Mantle's twin brothers. I don't think he said they played for the Aces, but he watched them play at Bringhurst Field in Alexandria back in the 40s, or I think it was the late 40s or early 50s. So Rennes and Lafayette, 2 teams, they're playing for that, what they call the pennant. And you see the pennants up there on the roof. That's what they play for. Well, Rennes won the first game. Lafayette come back and win game 2. So they play in game 3 in Lafayette. Rennes score a run in the top of the first inning. Lafayette come right back. Score 1 in the bottom of the first inning. So it was 1 game apiece, 1 run apiece. Tie. Second inning, that Lafayette pitcher, nasty, boy. That Rennes hitter, their first baseman, a left-hander, got a big old bat, stand about 6'4", weigh about 150 pounds. That first pitch, the little empire behind the plate, he about 4'10", 98 pounds, with 12 bottles of pop on top with foam inside. That first pitch, that rain hit her, swing and miss. That little umpire stepped back and said, 1. The next pitch, the rain hit her, spit on it, and that little umpire stepped back and said, 1. So we got 1 ball, 1 strike, 1 run apiece, 1 game apiece, tie. That next pitch come in, that rain hitter didn't swing at it, that little umpire stepped back about 5 steps and says 2. Well, I forgot to tell y'all that Lafayette catcher, he about 6'4", weigh about 240 pounds. And when that little umpire stepped back and said 2, both that catcher and the rain hitter get in the umpire's face and say, 2 what? And that umpire said, 2 damn close to call, I guarantee. So there you go. Now let's talk about, I'll do this just going, some humorous will bequests. So we'll do 2 kind of humor, but this is kind of back on estate planning point. There's a wonderful book, and I have several copies of it. I tend to do that with books that I like, just to make sure that I always have it. I am Marlene's son. My mother had a backup for everything, and I'm like Justin Wilson, wear belts and suspenders, at the same time. But it's a book that Robert Mention compiled called The Last Caprice. And for the program close to St. Patrick's Day, I am going to regale you with a bequest that I used to always read to my students in the spring around St. Patrick's Day, involving what a English gentleman thought about the Irish. And it's actually quite biting, but quite funny. It's clean. It's a family show. Let's see. But this book was compiled in 1963 in a will made in 1434. A member of the Norton family of Southwick, London, left all he had, quote, to be used unto the end of the world for the benefit of the poor, the hungry, the thirsty, the naked, the sick, and the wounded, and prisoners. And he appointed the House of Parliament as his executors. The will was set aside on the ground the testator was insane, and the estate was transferred to his natural heirs. The next one is a rich American who died as the last century drew to a close. That would have been 1800s. Left every dollar he possessed to a chorus girl he used to watch in the theater. He did not know her, and the reason he gave in his will for making the bequest was that her turned-up nose amused him. But here's one. If you consider this a capricious reason for making a bequest, you may find these 2 gentlemen and their reasons for withholding a bequest much more soundly motivated. Lord Redisel, a lifelong foe of communism, died in 1958 during his 80th year of life. He left an estate of $361,000, which in 1958 was, double real money, to be shared by all but one of his daughters. The exception was Jessica, who had named her child Lemon. Then there's one, Adolf J. Heimbeck, who died July 10, 1958. Got another 58 year. Wrote in his will, I leave nothing to my 2 sisters, Hazel and Catherine, as they revere Franklin D. Roosevelt, and the taxes caused by him more than equaled their share. So, don't use your will as a last caprice. It's a really rotten and cruel thing to do. don't do that. I mean, it's funny, and obviously it provides grist for the mill, but it also provides a teaching moment. A lot of people view what they get in an estate relative to others in their sort of degree as the love scoreboard, the love scorecard, their final grade. Mom and dad didn't love me as much because I didn't get as much. These are real feelings, y'all. I mean, I've had grown men cry over this. Okay. So this is serious. This can be serious business. All right. Our penultimate subject today is decanting. And I did a program for Lineberg Information Services about decanting recently. And decanting is basically if you have something in a trust that somebody doesn't like, if the trustee has the power to distribute all of the, let's say they're given a power of appointment, they can actually, if they can do that, and they have that power, they can essentially create a new trust. Basically, and it's why they call it decanting. You pour the old trust into the new trust. Well, it sounds easy until you do it. And I have been stunned, and one of the reasons why I try to teach, it's not that I'm a voyeur, crawling on the backs of the fallen, but the fallen do provide teaching moments. And decanting is not as easy. And my evidence for that is, over the last 3 or 4 years, I mean, there have been a ton, like 20, more than 20, cases around the country where people who decanted incorrectly, including a number of lawyers, were either kicked out, disciplined. In one case in Illinois, it was their malpractice carrier who said, "You don't have coverage for this mistake." And he sued them and lost. The court of appeal in Illinois, now that's as crooked a place as there is, but in Illinois, the court said, this is an intentional tort, which is excluded under the policy from coverage. Remember, insurance policy is a contract, and they're only you're only covered for what are called covered risks. So with that said, all right, that leads us to, well, the lesson, and the real lesson there, and what I tried to convey in a newsletter that's going out on Laissez, as well as the webinar. If you're an estate planner or a trustee or a trust protector, or whoever's got the responsibility for decanting, or the power, not so much the responsibility, the power, and somebody comes to you, one of the beneficiaries, or somebody connected with the beneficiary, and wants you to decant, you really need to ascertain and divine the true reason why. I wrote about a case, I've written about it before, another article coming out shortly, in Delaware, where a corporate trustee basically, I think, got kind of snookered about, this was one of those let's decant and divorce kind of things. It was like a 2-step process. And it pushed the poor trustee into essentially having to, after the fact, attack their own decanting. And that doesn't always, some judges really look afoul at that. So you gotta be real careful with that. All right, now the last part of the show today is going to be what I have, and I try to do this most of the time, to highlight books. And this is what I call the book nook. There was a book nook bookstore in my hometown of Alexandria when I was a kid. So I just remember the book nook. The first book is by a guy that is in Cleveland named Philip Pavarini Jr., and it's Probate Bonds Made Simple, a guide for agents, courts, fiduciaries, and lawyers. And when we post this, I haven't done this yet, but we're going to do this going forward. Going to list the books and who wrote them in the notes, in the and on the various posts on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, wherever else this goes. But Phil's book, let me tell you, there's a reason why probate bonds can be very valuable. And a lot of times people just tell you to waive bond. With family executors and personal representatives, that's often a bad idea. So, but Phil's book, and he's a very helpful guy and very active on LinkedIn and that. There's a couple that I see, and I hope I don't botch their last names. Heather and Douglas Bonaparte, almost sounds like Bonaparte, like Napoleon. But it's a book. They're husband and wife. One's a financial planner, and I think the other is more on the qualitative side of planning. Well, this book is named Money Together: How to Find Fairness in Your Relationship and Become an Unstoppable Financial Team. And this is singing to the choir for me, because and an upcoming guest, my friend Emily Bouchard. Emily and I, I think 13 years ago, first did a program at Symposium and/or Rendezvous, I forget which one it was, on purposeful prenups. And we've since reprised it for Laissez, Lineberg Information Services, on purposeful prenups. And I believe that the prenuptial agreement can be a great tool if everybody, the representatives, because the representatives are the one that screw this up most of the time, because they see the world as a zero-sum game. But we forget that when a couple is about to be married or contemplating marriage, the number one reason why couples split is over money. Different money views. So the more we can do to encourage them to get to know it, because money is a taboo subject. A lot of people don't talk about it. It causes great anxiety. But this book, it's gotten some great reviews, and I haven't read the whole thing yet. I plan on it. In fact, I'm probably going to read it, and I may have to, but there's the book. Like I said, we're going to have the whole list, but I might have to have them on as guests. The next book, and another guy that he's quite a talented guy on LinkedIn. I see him broadcasting basketball games and all that kind of thing. Dr. Joaquin E. Wallace. It's a book, Generational Wealth Begins with Generational Knowledge. And this is a absolutely fabulous book. He really understands and gets it. It's important. You need to know who you are to know where you're going. And, it's like I always tell people, I think it's Miles' Law. A lot of times we tout it as a Southern adage, but it has a name, Miles' Law. Basically, where you stand on an issue depends on where you sit. And like in the table of contents, this book, Part 1, Unearthing Your Financial Past. And then Part 2, Reprogramming Your Present. Inherited Financial Narratives and Your Financial Genetic Code. You know, we've covered a couple of books that try to help with this. Kalen's book on basically prenup partnerships. From my standpoint, trying to help nurture a nascent relationship on the prenup side and dealing with, Rochelle Connor's book that I covered a couple of episodes ago on generational trauma. Estate planning can cause generational trauma too. So that's very important. The next book is from David Russell, and it's Bridging the Divide, Generational Perspectives on Money, a guide for advisors navigating family wealth, values, and conversations across generations. And he works at Argent Trust, and I have they start in Louisiana, and they used to sponsor my programs, my family wealth conferences, for years. Great people, just really good. Got to see Kenny Brown Jr. when I spoke in Oklahoma City and Tulsa, Oklahoma, last fall, and but his book is basically, it offers a fresh perspective on the generational differences that often create conflict and misunderstanding within families. By exploring the historical context and cultural influences that have shaped each generation's attitudes toward money, you'll gain a deeper appreciation for their values, priorities, and concerns, and help families bridge the generational divide and create a shared vision for their financial future. David sent me a copy of his book, and he inscribed it to me, and I really appreciate it. It says, "To a consummate professional, a colleague and friend, thank you, Paul David." A really good, well-written book, and an easy read, but a very, very profound one. The next book is really sort of an updating, if you will, of a book that came out years ago. But this is Bridging Generations, Transitioning Family Wealth and Values for a Sustainable Legacy by the late Roy Williams and Amy Castoro. And this, I really like, and they have pages and pages of testimonials. But the dedication I love. We dedicate this book to the love most families share, to the peace and harmony they desire, and to the wisdom of family leaders who make the decision to build trust and communication with the next generation. We need more books like that. All right, our penultimate book has been described as an illuminating, compassionate study of the mental and emotional issues hiding beneath the veneer of success. The book's title is Fragile Power 2.0, Wealth, Narcissism, and Mental Health, Lessons from Treating the Wealthy and Famous by Dr. Paul L. Hokemeyer. This book is and I'm not all the way through it yet, but I love how it says, and this is one of the testimonials on the back. For decades, our culture has been pretending that the upper echelon in the world is too wealthy or powerful to succumb to illness or disease. Dr. Hokemeyer brilliantly addresses this misconception in Fragile Power by sharing his clinical prowess and expertise in presenting successful strategies for behavioral health clinicians worldwide to absorb. And he says, happiness is an inside job. And that is true, y'all. That is absolutely true. If you look outside of yourself, and I did this for a long time, but I'll be happy if I can only get the right job, if I can only get the right girl, if I can only get. And it doesn't work like that. I had to learn the hard way. And to be honest with you, it took a long time for me to learn it. But I'm responsible. And Stoicism really helped me as much as anything else. Because one of the beautiful things about Stoicism is I constantly remind myself, A, that I'm mortal, B, that I'm not indispensable, C, that I have no control over anything outside of myself. People are going to do what they're going to do. And that's the thing, one of the things about the meditations by Marcus Aurelius, some people say, well, it gets kind of repetitive. Well, he's running into the same things. He's seeing people, falling all over themselves, trying to curry favor with him. They're lying to him, and, he figures it out. And he's like, when are these people going to learn? And, he's talking to himself. So, it kind of limits the conversation. But it's a profound book, Fragile Power 2.0. The last book, and this is sort of a toss-out to my friend Tina Sula, who I will also have to have one day as a guest. Tina is really a superstar that's come out, like Diana Ross song, I'm Coming Out, really in the area of family philanthropy. And this is a book, and it just, Tina teaches networking at the University of Michigan. And has a great Coursera course, and she's done a TED Talk, and she's really good. But this book is named Infinite Impact, Stories of Alignment. And Tina and I always talk about how important it is to be aligned. Aligned in your mission, everything else. Does it align with what I want to do? Or am I just being blown through the desert, like a tumbleweed? And for a long time, I felt like that. Or I was like a diamond that was being polished. Well, the diamonds don't feel that polish as they take off a part of the diamond. But when you're a human being, that polishing hurt. That buffing hurt. And I don't mean physically. Mentally, psychologically, emotionally. So today, I'm about alignment. And if people aren't aligned, I'm just not going there. But this is a book that she is the CEO and founder of NGNG Enterprises. No guts, no glory. I like that. Again, it's really stories, and it's a follow-up. She had a book, and I have it in the library here. It was about aligned entrepreneurship. There's a lot of people want to be their own boss, but they're really not aligned with what that means or entails. They have a job mentality, but owner responsibilities. And if they're not aligned, they're probably not going to be successful. Or if they are successful, chances are they won't be happy. Once again, I go back and I'll basically start to close with this. When I adopted my mantra at the end of the Polish occupation of having a ball, making a difference, I gained in alignment. Tina and I have done presentations before, and one of the things that I often say, and I say it not only in those presentations, when I was interviewing, on a team interviewing a candidate, I want to know their why. What's your why? Why do you want to do this? Is it just for the paycheck? Is it for the prestige? Is it to check a box? What's your why? And if you can have that and be aligned with your why, sky's the limit, y'all. All right. I think I've prattled on long enough. This is Paul Hood, the Cajun Counselor, bidding y'all au revoir, adieu. And that's a wrap. Hope you enjoyed this episode of the Cajun Counselor. This is Paul Hood saying Laissez, temps, rouler. Au revoir.